I see Sheriff Reichert is with us. Congressman Dave Reichert of Washington's 8th District, we're glad to have you with us, and your written statement will appear in the record in its entirety without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Glad to have you here and to recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I get started, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to have a letter written by two law enforcement caucus chairs, myself and Bill Pascrill, that's been sent to the President regarding the topic of the COPS grants.
Yes. Without objection.
Thank you. I don't know how I follow Jose Beaver and Justin Beaver, but I'm going to give it a shot. And I have lots of stories too, but you know, this is really, it's a great story that you've told, sir, about animals returning to a clean river. This is really a story, when you talk about law enforcement and community, it's really a story about human beings who can function in a community, who come back to neighborhoods who have been sort of a dirty river in the middle of some pretty productive parts of our cities across the country. Part of the success in allowing that sort of thing to happen has been the COPS program, has been the ability for police officers, police chiefs, and sheriffs across the country to come to the COPS office and make application for hiring grants. Now, when I was the sheriff, my last 8 years of my 33-year career in Seattle, I used the COPS grants on a number of occasions, and yes, it's true. The chairman and I have had these discussions. It's very, very difficult for us to apply for a grant and 3 years later come up with the full cost of the employees. But it does give you an opportunity to work with your council and your state legislators to come up with those funding. After 9/11, I think it's one of the great success stories of the COPS office. It provided an ability to adapt and respond quickly to critical law enforcement incidents or emerging issues in the field, and they've done so many times, including providing $92 million to the city of New York shortly after 9/11 for officer hiring and making hiring grants available to Orlando and Dallas, San Bernardino in the aftermath of mass shootings. And there are other stories that I could go into, and I know the controversy around COPS grants and that local cities and counties and states should be paying for these police officer positions on their own. However, today there is a great need, an emergent need for this sort of help. And I think that, again, as the chairman and I have visited on many occasions on what does the future hold for supporting local law enforcement across this country. And I know moving money to burn JAG is one way to do that. But unless there's some specific language that directs that some of the money be actually spent on hiring police officers, I don't know if it's going to happen. The other thing I want to thank the chairman for and members of the committee is their commitment to increase the funding on Project Safe Neighborhoods, which is the project that was specifically designed when I was a sheriff, and I was an integral part of developing Project Safe Neighborhoods. $20 million increase in that budget, and I appreciate that. There's more to do in the area of gangs and gun violence and drugs, as you know. But I think today my message is we need to keep intact some form of COPS hiring grants and begin a transition to supporting police departments and sheriffs and police chiefs across the country in other ways so they can free up money to actually hire officers. So I think it's important to look ahead to 21st century solutions to assisting police departments and sheriff's office in becoming accredited, to having training programs that are top-notch, to having evidence rooms that are operating at the highest level of expertise and collecting evidence, storing evidence, preparing it for court, to hiring. So this accreditation process to me is one of those most important things. But first and foremost, we got to make sure that today, in this most critical time of keeping our neighborhoods safe, so that real people come back to our neighborhoods, it is absolutely critical that we keep intact for a while the COPS grants program. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reichert. We admire and respect our men and women in uniform, and I was so pleased to hear when President Trump came to the Republican retreat to tell us that one of his top priorities was to ensure that our men and women in blue and our men and women in uniform around the world are respected and as they should be for the great work that you do. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Kilmer.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank you for speaking about the importance of COPS grants, certainly around the hiring issues, but maybe you can just speak briefly to the importance of those grants also in trying to enhance the relationship between law enforcement and the communities in which they work. In our neck of the woods, for example, Tacoma's undertaking this Project Peace initiative to try to kind of lower the temperature around some of the potential concerns, and certainly COPS grants can be really vital in that regard too. If you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I think that is a critical point to make. I spent a lot of time in the Tacoma area back in the days when I was investigating the Green River case and know the neighborhood and community pretty well. One of the critical tools that law enforcement can use today are storefront officers, our school resource officers, our officers who are engaged in the Police Activities League, the PAL program, any outreach that police officers and community can do together to go into those neighborhoods that may not have the most positive view of law enforcement. Once they get to know the police officers, the neighborhood begins to change, believe it or not. I'll tell just a short story about Baltimore. I'm sure they'll be proud to hear that I've shared this story because it's great work that they are doing in Baltimore. One of the programs that they've recently instituted after some of the violence that has occurred in their city, tragedies, they planned an outing with out into the outdoors and a hiking and camping trip with some inner city youths, and they spent a week in this up in this camp, and at the end of the week, everybody's in plain clothes, but at the end of the week, there is a gathering of the young people and the counselors around a campfire. But there was something different about this gathering versus the gathering that's occurred the entire week with this group. This time, the counselors wore their police uniforms and surprised and shocked all of the young men and women who were members of gangs or about to be affiliated with gangs. They were shocked and amazed and surprised. They had just spent the entire week and had a ball with a bunch of cops. So they made tremendous progress as a result of that interaction. The COPS office gives police departments and sheriff's offices and state police offices across the country the opportunity to build this sort of program when they don't have the funds right now to do that. And it is absolutely critical, and I think will and can result in the reduction of crime and building neighborhoods.
Serrano.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your testimony and for your support of the COPS program. I was here when President Clinton worked closely with Congress and vice versa to create this program. And it was never the intent that localities pay for it. The intent was for the federal government to be involved in augmenting and helping the local communities with all the issues that they had. So those people that now make it controversial, as you stated in your opening statement, by saying let localities pay for it, are forgetting what the reason for creating a separate program was. Otherwise, why would you need a federal program if you're just going to tell localities to pay for it? It was to create a better situation and a better atmosphere, because God knows there might be 5, 10, 15, 100 issues in this country that merit immediate attention. One of them is for the community to understand who law enforcement is, and for law enforcement to understand who the community is. They both need each other, and they need to know that as soon as possible.
If I could comment real quick, Mr. Chairman, I think it's absolutely critical, though, that the community the local community has some skin in the game, and they need to be a part of this process, and eventually, I think, need to take responsibility for it. So I'm in agreement with you on the initial intent of the COPS office. But I've found that when you go into communities, and I'm talking about my local community as I served as the sheriff and as a deputy detective and SWAT commander, hostage negotiator, when you go into the communities and you begin to work with the community, if it's all about the police are going to do this and the community is going to do that around you, and it's not the community involved and engaged with us, there's no success. So I do think that there is a responsibility by local governments to have some skin in the game and be a part of the process.
I've always felt the single most important part of our law enforcement, the entire law enforcement community in the United States are our men and women in uniform. But your good heart, good common sense, dealing with the situation in neighborhoods that you know better than anybody else. So really appreciate your service.
They just need to know now they got backup.
Yeah, that's right.
All
We
right.
need to make sure they all know we've got their back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.